question that seemed to echo across the scorched field was simple, brutal, and unspoken. How does a person return from a moment that destroys everything they believed they were? Claire Donovan did not have the answer. She only had the heat burning her skin, the sting of dust in her eyes, and the rising panic that she was still trapped inside a nightmare she could not wake from. When she opened her eyes, the world came back to her in harsh fragments. The torn habit scattered like dead crows around her, the bruises blooming across her ribs, the rawness of her throat, the distant echo of Wyatt Dorsey's laughter, sharp, mocking, unforgettable. She pulled in a ragged breath, but the air shuddered in her lungs. Shame and terror wrapped around her like a second skin, and she curled forward, pressing trembling hands to the shredded remains of her clothing. A nun was supposed to be protected by faith, by vows, by the sanctity of her calling. Yet the prairie had no mercy. The prairie watched and kept its silence. Claire forced herself to move, inch by painful inch, gathering the large leaves nearby to cover what remained of her dignity. The sun beat down without kindness. Every step she took felt like a plea whispered into a void. Someone see me, someone help me, someone remind me I still exist. She stumbled through the tall grass, her bare feet sinking into dry dirt, her vision blurring as nausea crept up her spine. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away from Wyatt, away from the memory of his hands, away from the hollow place inside her where her faith had cracked open and fallen apart. When she saw the dark silhouette of a rider on the horizon, her body locked with fear. Her breath stilled. For a moment, she thought it was him, that Wyatt had returned to drag her back into the nightmare. But as the figure approached, the shape became clearer. Broad shoulders, a steady posture, reins held with calm control. She blinked hard, trying to steady her spinning vision. The man slowed his horse as he drew close, the dust settling around him like drifting smoke. He dismounted, boots touching the earth with a quiet thud. "Ma'am?" His voice carried a gentleness strange to hear on the open prairie. Henry McAllister did not rush toward her. He did not stare. He did not demand answers. He simply shrugged off his coat and extended it, palms open, as though offering peace to something wild and wounded. Claire's breath cracked. She hesitated, her body recoiling out of instinct. But Henry lowered his voice even further. "No harm. Just take it. You're safe with me." Safe. The word felt foreign, unreachable, but she reached for the coat anyway, pulling it around herself, the weight of it grounding her shaking limbs. Henry didn't touch her. He didn't even step closer. He only nodded once, slow and reassuring, before leading his horse beside her. "My ranch is just over the ridge. Martha's there. She'll know how to help you." Claire wanted to speak, to thank him, to explain something, anything. But the words couldn't find their way through the tightness in her throat. Henry kept his eyes forward, giving her space, walking beside her at a careful pace. Each step felt like a fragile thread, pulling her back into the world of the living. When they reached McAllister Ranch, Martha Green appeared in the doorway, her apron dusted with flour, her expression calm but perceptive. She took one look at Claire and ushered her inside with a softness that required no questions. Warm water, clean fabric, a place to sit without trembling. Claire felt her lungs loosen for the first time since the attack, though the fear still clung to her bones. Henry stayed only long enough to be sure she was safe before saddling up again. "I'll bring Sheriff Collier," he told Martha quietly. No one does what someone did to her and walks away from it. Claire heard the words, and a new fear flickered beneath her skin. Justice sounded like a faraway thing, dangerous to reach for. But Henry looked at her before riding off, his voice steady. "No one's touching you again. Not while I'm breathing." The door closed behind him, and the ranch grew quiet. Claire sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her hands shaking less now, though the memory of Wyatt still pressed like a bruise against her mind. She didn't know who Henry McAllister truly was. She didn't know if justice would find its way across the harsh frontier, but she knew this. For the first time since the world had shattered beneath her, she felt the faintest pulse of hope. Small, fragile, flickering like a candle in the wind. And she clung to it, because it was all she had. The brief calm inside the ranch house held for only a handful of hours before the world shifted again. Claire had just begun to steady her breathing, letting the warmth of Martha's gentle presence settle over her like a blanket. When the distant crunch of wagon wheels and hoofbeats stirred the air, Martha paused mid-step. Claire felt her stomach tighten, a cold tremor creeping up her spine. Something about the sound, slow, deliberate, too familiar, sent a ripple of dread through the room. Martha touched Claire's arm. "Stay here, sweetheart." But Claire already knew. Fear had a memory sharper than any blade, and it recognized the cadence of a man who never approached without taking something from the world. Outside, Henry's voice drifted in, low and steady as he greeted the visitor. Claire rose, legs trembling beneath her, and crept toward the window. Through the thin curtain, she saw him, Wyatt Dorsey, standing beside his horse, hat tilted low, pretending to look puzzled and harmless. The sight of him made her breath falter. Her fingers gripped the window frame so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Wyatt spoke with a false drawl, projecting an easy confidence. "Henry, I'm mighty sorry to trouble you. Heard one of my horses wandered this way. Thought I'd come check your property. Last thing I want is to bother your family." His tone was smooth, practiced. A lie dipped in honey. Henry folded his arms. "You can check from where you're standing. Nobody needs to go snooping around my home." Wyatt chuckled lightly, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Henry, why the hostility? A man loses a horse. He's allowed to look." "Not here," Henry said simply. The tension between them stretched taut as a drawn rope. Claire stepped back from the window, shaking. She pressed herself against the wall, sliding down until she crouched low, arms wrapped around her body. The fear was so sharp, it almost stole the breath from her lungs. Martha knelt beside her, whispering, "Don't you worry, Claire. Henry won't let him touch a thing." But Wyatt's voice carried into the house, slicing straight through her. "Heard you've been taking in strays, Henry. Folks say you got yourself a woman inside." Claire's heart dropped. Henry's boots scraped against the dirt. "Who's talking?" "Town's always talking," Wyatt replied, feigning innocence. "But I figure if someone's hiding, maybe they know something about my horse." He stepped closer to the porch. Henry blocked the way with his body. "No one's hiding from you, Wyatt. And you're not taking a step inside my house." A long, dangerous silence followed. Wyatt's smile faded. The mask slipped. "I'm going to have a look around. Don't make this difficult." Henry did not move, did not raise his voice. "Turn around. Get off my land." Wyatt signaled with a slight tilt of his head. Two younger ranch hands emerged from behind the wagon. Men Claire hadn't noticed before, both armed with the kind of arrogance that only came from following a dangerous man. Chaos broke quickly after that. Wyatt pushed Henry hard enough to stagger him back. The two ranch hands rushed forward, fists already clenched. Henry braced himself, and the fight erupted in a storm of dirt and shouts. Claire cried out, instinct overriding fear. She ran toward the door, but Martha held her back. "No, Claire, don't go out there." But her body shook with helplessness as she watched through the gap in the doorway. Henry took a punch to the jaw, then another to the ribs, but he fought with a fierce resolve, fueled by something more powerful than pride. Protection. He swung back, landing blows that sent one man sprawling. Wyatt circled like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You think you can keep her from me?" he snarled. Claire's breath hitched. The world tilted. Henry gritted his teeth, wiping blood from his lip. "I can keep you from everything." Wyatt lunged, but before he could reach Henry, the sharp crack of approaching hooves sliced through the melee. Sheriff Collier rode into the yard, rifle raised, eyes scanning the chaos. "Enough!" he barked. Wyatt and his men froze. Henry stepped back, panting, his shirt streaked with sweat and dust. The sheriff slid off his horse, positioning himself between the men. "Wyatt Dorsey, you're trespassing, threatening a man on his own property and starting a brawl. You planning to add anything else to the list?" Wyatt wiped a smear of dirt from his cheek, forcing a thin smile. "Just looking for my horse, Sheriff." Henry overreacted. Henry spat blood onto the ground. "He's lying." "He usually is," Collier muttered. "But I didn't see what started this, so for today, everyone clears out." Wyatt's gaze drifted toward the house. For a moment his eyes sharpened, as though sensing Claire's presence behind the wooden walls. A slow, chilling grin spread across his face. "We'll talk again, Henry." Henry stepped forward, but the sheriff raised a hand. Wyatt mounted his horse, his men climbing onto theirs. As he turned to leave, he threw one last glance at the house, calculated, menacing. Claire felt it like a hand closing around her throat. When they were gone, Henry leaned against the porch post, catching his breath. Martha guided Claire outside, but Claire kept her distance, trembling as though every bone inside her wanted to collapse. Henry met her eyes. "He won't touch you. Not while I'm here." But Claire knew the moment of safety had fractured. Wyatt wasn't done, and he would be back. By the next morning, the fight at the ranch had woven itself into every corner of Dodge City, carried from one porch to another, stretched and twisted until almost nothing resembled the truth. Claire Donovan's name floated through the alleys and saloons like drifting ash, whispered, reshaped, and weaponized by people who had never once looked into her eyes. She walked with Martha toward the general store that day, wrapped in Henry's old coat, her steps small and guarded. She wasn't ready to face the town, but food had run low, and pretending the world outside didn't exist wasn't possible anymore. The moment Claire stepped onto Main Street, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Some women tilted their chins, whispering behind gloved hands. A pair of cowboys nudged each other, smirking. Claire kept her gaze on the dusty ground, but the words chased her anyway. Sharp, stinging, unavoidable. "Did you hear? She showed up half naked at Henry's place. People say she's trouble. Probably wants attention. Or money." Claire tightened her grip on the basket in her hands. Shame rose like heat beneath her skin. But beneath the shame was something colder, more dangerous. The realization that these people, strangers, had already decided her story for her. Martha squeezed Claire's wrist gently. "Keep walking, sweetheart. They don't know a thing worth listening to." But Claire felt every stare like a needle. The lie that Wyatt had spun about a missing horse and a harmless visit had spread faster than any truth she could offer. The world outside the ranch felt hostile, unpredictable, ready to swallow her whole. By evening, the weight of the town's judgment had become unbearable. Claire stood on the porch, looking toward the steeple rising above the rooftops. The church had once been her sanctuary. Now it felt like a test she wasn't sure she could survive. Yet something inside her, maybe the last shard of courage she hadn't lost, whispered that the only way to reclaim herself was to stop hiding. When she told Henry and Martha she was going, Martha stiffened. "Honey, you don't owe them anything." "Maybe not," Claire said quietly. "But I owe myself the truth." So she walked to the church alone, coat pulled tight, heart beating too fast. The sanctuary was already filled, lanterns glowing against the high wooden beams. People turned as she entered. Some stared openly. Some looked away. But one man didn't look away at all. Wyatt Dorsey leaned in the back row, arms crossed, expression smooth as polished stone. The sight of him made Claire's chest tighten, but she kept moving, finding a seat near the front. The service began, but Claire barely heard the hymns. Her pulse drowned everything out. She could feel Wyatt's attention like a shadow behind her. Halfway through the sermon, the inevitable happened. Wyatt stood. "Reverend, I've got something that needs saying." The church fell silent. The Reverend hesitated. "Mr. Dorsey, this isn't... It's about the woman living at Henry McAllister's ranch." Claire's breath caught. People shifted, eager for spectacle. Wyatt stepped into the aisle, hands spread as though he were the reasonable man among them. "I've been accused of doing something terrible, something I didn't do, and I think the town deserves to hear both sides." Claire rose slowly, her heartbeat pounding against her ribs. The Reverend opened his mouth, but Claire spoke first, her voice thin but steady. "I'll speak." A rustle moved through the congregation. Wyatt smirked. "By all means." Claire stepped forward, feeling the weight of 100 eyes pressing onto her. Her knees wavered, but she kept going, stopping at the front of the room. She clasped her hands to stop them from shaking. "I didn't come here to accuse anyone," she began softly. "I came because I couldn't carry the silence anymore." A few faces softened. Most did not. She swallowed. "I was attacked, left in the prairie, and the man who did it stood here just now, pretending he wants the truth." Wyatt scoffed, arms crossing tightly. "Lies," he muttered. Claire met his gaze. She didn't look away. "You know what you did." The room tensed, breaths held. Claire continued, her words trembling but clear. She told them about waking on the field, about the torn habit, about the terror. Not in graphic detail, just enough for the truth to stand, unshakable. Her voice wavered only when she said, "I didn't expect kindness, not after what he did. But Henry saved my life, and I'm not going to let lies destroy the only truth I have left." When she finished, silence enveloped the church. Then whispers, uncertain, uncomfortably shifting. A woman in the third row frowned, muttering, "No proof?" Another murmured, "Could be exaggerating." Claire felt herself shrinking inward, until a new voice rose from the right side of the sanctuary. "It's true." Heads snapped toward the sound. Jacob Miller stood stiffly, his hat clutched in both hands, eyes flicking between the crowd and Claire. He looked terrified, but determined. "I saw Wyatt bring a woman to the edge of his property, saw her clothes torn. He paid me to keep quiet. I didn't. I'm done being afraid of him." Wyatt spun toward Jacob in a flash of fury. "You little—" But the room had already shifted. The uncertainty dissolved into outrage. Murmurs turned sharp, condemning. Someone shouted for Wyatt to sit down. Another told him to leave. The Reverend raised both hands to quiet the rising storm. Meanwhile, Claire stood perfectly still, the trembling inside her slowly easing. Not because the danger was gone, but because she finally knew she wasn't alone anymore. Her truth had found its voice, and the shadows in the church had begun to retreat. Chaos erupted the moment Jacob Miller's words struck the air. The church, moments earlier frozen in uneasy silence, cracked open like a drought-starved field. Wyatt Dorsey lunged forward, fury twisting his face into something unrecognizable. "You lying coward!" he shouted, shoving past two men in the aisle. Jacob stumbled back, but before Wyatt could reach him, Henry McAllister rose from his seat near the front, a quiet storm gathering force. Henry stepped between them, broad shoulders blocking Wyatt's path. "You touch that boy," he said low and steady, "and I swear the sheriff won't get to you before I do." Wyatt's sneers sharpened. "You think you're some kind of hero, Henry? Think you can parade around saving strays and making yourself look righteous? You don't know a damn thing." "Oh, I know enough," Henry replied. "I know what you did out on that prairie." The murmurs swelling through the pews carried a different charge now, a shifting tide no longer moving in Wyatt's favor. People he'd bullied, intimidated, or manipulated for years were seeing him clearly for the first time. And Wyatt sensed it. His expression faltered. He jerked toward Claire instead, eyes blazing with hate. "You brought this on yourself," he hissed. "You ruined my life." Claire's breath stilled. Fear flickered across her face, but when Henry angled closer, ready to shield her, she lifted a trembling hand to stop him. She stood on her own. She met Wyatt's stare with a steady, aching strength. "You did that yourself," she said quietly. Something in Wyatt snapped. He lunged again, this time toward Claire. Gasps tore through the sanctuary. But Wyatt never reached her. The doors slammed open with a heavy crack, and Sheriff Collier strode inside, rifle slung across his chest, boots thundering against the wooden floor. "Enough!" His voice boomed through the church rafters like rolling thunder. Wyatt froze mid-step. The sheriff's hand hovered near his belt. "Wyatt Dorsey, you're under arrest for assault, attempted harm, coercion, and obstruction of testimony." Wyatt barked a bitter laugh. "You don't have any real evidence." "I have a witness," Sheriff Collier replied, nodding to Jacob. "I have a victim. And right now, I have a whole church full of people who watched you try to attack two folks in a place of worship. So yes, I've got enough." Wyatt's bravado dissolved into something reckless and desperate. He lunged toward the side exit, trying to break free. The sheriff lunged faster. Henry stepped in from the other side. Jacob ducked away as Wyatt collided with a pew, crashing hard. Collier snapped iron cuffs around his wrists. Wyatt writhed, spitting curses, kicking against the floorboards. "You'll regret this, all of you." The sheriff tightened the restraints. "I've regretted many things in my life, Wyatt," he said. "Arresting you isn't one of them." The church exhaled in one long tremor as Collier hauled Wyatt toward the doorway. The men dragged him down the steps, his boots scraping wood, his voice twisting into threats that no longer held the same power. Jacob collapsed into a seat, shaking. Henry clapped a hand on his shoulder, firm, steady, grateful. "You did the right thing, son." But Claire, she didn't move. She stood near the altar, still as a figure carved from pale stone. The voices around her faded into a distant hum. Relief didn't come. Not yet. Instead, she felt the weight of everything. The fight, the stares, the memories pressing against her lungs as though trying to crush the air from her body. Henry approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "It's over now," he murmured. But Claire shook her head. Her voice trembled when it finally broke free. "It's not. Henry, I don't even know who I am anymore." He swallowed. "You're Claire." "No," she whispered. "I was a nun. I lived my whole life believing I had purpose, that I was protected, that I belonged to something larger than myself. And now—" Her eyes brimmed, but the tears didn't fall. "Wyatt didn't just hurt my body. He broke the person I thought I was. That habit on the ground, it wasn't just cloth. It was everything I believed about myself." Henry looked at her with a softness that held no pity, only understanding. "You think your worth was in a piece of fabric?" Claire pressed her arms around her ribs. "I don't know where else it could have been." "Right here," Henry said, tapping gently over her heart. "It never lived anywhere else." Her breath quivered, an exhale tinged with disbelief. "I'm not sure I can be that person again." "You don't have to be," Henry replied. "You don't owe the world the same version of yourself. You're allowed to change, you're allowed to heal, and you're allowed to take your life back." Claire blinked, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she let a tear fall. Not of fear, but of release. She felt the smallest shift in her chest, a loosening of the tightness she had carried like a shackle. Henry offered his hand. Not pushing, not pulling, simply holding the space for her to choose. She placed her fingers into his, and the warmth of that simple connection steadied something inside her. People were still watching, some with compassion, some with guilt, some with curiosity. But Claire didn't shrink this time. She didn't hide behind the coat or behind Henry. She lifted her chin, wiped her tears, and took one step forward on her own. Sheriff Collier's voice drifted back from outside. "Get him in the wagon." Henry let out a quiet breath. "Whatever comes next," he told her softly, "you won't face it alone." Claire nodded. For the first time, she believed him. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet truth began to settle. Maybe survival wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning of something she had never imagined. The year that followed did not arrive with dramatic revelations or sweeping transformations. It unfolded quietly, like dawn spreading across the prairie. Slow, steady, nearly invisible, until one day the light simply felt different. Claire Donovan learned to breathe again within the rhythm of McAllister Ranch, a place that had once been a refuge of desperation, but gradually became the soil where her life rooted itself anew. In the early months, Claire moved carefully through the days, her steps soft, her gaze often distant. Trauma had shaped her posture more than she realized, always bracing, always expecting some sudden cruelty to shatter what she was rebuilding. But the ranch had its own way of teaching endurance. The seasons changed, and so did Claire. She woke to the hum of morning wind slipping through cottonwood branches. She fed chickens with Martha, whose calm presence grounded her more than words ever could. She swept the porch in long, thoughtful strokes, feeling her body loosen with the rhythm of simple tasks. When Henry tended the fields, she brought him water, sometimes staying to watch the horses run, wild, free, unbroken in spirit. There were days when the memories clawed at her, dragging her back into the darkness she wished she could shed. On those days, she felt her breath shorten, her hands tremble without warning. But the ranch, its quiet rituals, its honest labor, kept offering her the same message. The world may wound, but it can also heal, given patience and gentle repetition. Henry never rushed her healing. He moved around her with a steadiness she came to rely on, speaking only when she needed words and remaining silent when silence was mercy. He checked the ranch perimeter more often now, strengthening the gates, walking the fence lines at dusk. Claire knew he was doing it for her, though he never said so aloud. His presence became something she leaned toward, not as rescue, not as savior, but as a place where she felt safe enough to exist without fear. One summer morning, while Claire planted new lavender roots near the fence line, Henry approached with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted one, the steam curling between them. He studied her for a moment, not the fragile woman collapsed in the field, not the trembling voice in the church, but the person standing before him now. Stronger, more present, more herself. "You've changed this place," Henry said. She blinked, surprised. "I haven't done anything." "You've done everything," he replied quietly. The words slipped into her chest with unexpected warmth. She looked out over the fields, the golden sweep of grass bending in the wind. "Sometimes I still don't know who I am," she admitted. Henry shook his head. "You don't have to define yourself by what happened. You get to choose the rest of the story." The rest of the story. The phrase lingered with her for days. As autumn arrived, the ranch transformed into shades of amber and rust. Claire found herself laughing more. Small, hesitant sounds at first, then brighter ones that surprised even her. She taught the neighboring children their letters on the porch, her voice growing steadier with each lesson. She helped Martha prepare harvest meals and mended clothes for the ranch hands who passed through. She no longer felt like a shadow drifting through Henry's world. She felt like part of it, and slowly, so slowly she barely recognized its beginning, love began to grow. It wasn't sudden or breathless or sweeping. It was quiet. It was patient. It was a hand brushing lightly against hers as they closed a stable door. It was the way Henry's eyes softened when she spoke. It was the comfort of knowing he would stand beside her without expectation, without demand. One winter night, as snow dusted the ranch roofs, Claire found Henry repairing a lantern in the barn. The warm glow cast soft light across his face. She stepped closer, heart steady but vulnerable. "Henry," she said, barely above a whisper. He looked up immediately. "What is it?" She hesitated, fingers twisting in the hem of her coat. "I've been thinking about everything, about who I was and who I'm becoming. And I realized something." He waited, silent, open. "I love you." The barn went quiet enough to hear the snow settling outside. Henry set the lantern aside and stepped toward her. "I didn't want to say it before," he confessed, "because I didn't want you to feel beholden to me. But Claire, I've loved you for a long time now." She felt her eyes sting, not with sorrow, but something sweet and overwhelming. Henry reached out, brushing a thumb gently across her cheek. "You don't belong to fear anymore," he murmured. "You belong to a life you choose." Spring returned, soft and full of new beginnings. Under the wide branches of the ranch's oldest cottonwood tree, Claire and Henry exchanged vows. Not elaborate, not formal, simply honest. The community gathered, many of them carrying the memory of the church confrontation, but this time they came with warm faces and open hands. Claire wore a simple cream dress that Martha had sewn. Henry wore his best shirt, freshly pressed but still bearing the quiet wear of ranch life. When he took Claire's hands, a hush fell across the gathering. "You deserve a home," he whispered, "and I'm honored you chose mine." Claire felt tears rise, but not the trembling kind. These were soft, steady tears of arrival, of stepping into the life she had built day by gentle day. When they kissed beneath the cottonwood branches, the prairie wind carried the moment like a blessing. One year, one journey, one rebirth brought to life in the heart of the West. In the quiet after the vows, when the guests drifted back toward the ranch house and the golden light softened across the plains, Claire remained beneath the cottonwood tree. The wind moved slowly through its branches, whispering over her skin like something ancient, something patient. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle inside her, tender and whole. For the first time in so long, there was no shadow at her back, no tremor in her chest, no voice telling her she was something broken, only softness, only breath, only the gentle truth that she had found a place where she could rest. Henry stepped beside her, silent, warm, present. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. She leaned into him, and the world felt steady again. The long road behind her began to blur, its harsh edges fading like dust carried off by the wind. Ahead of her stretched something quieter, something kinder. Not perfect, but hers, and in that soft pause, she let herself believe in tomorrow. Slowly, sweetly, like a whisper carried over open plains. And so the story settles here, in the hush of the West, where healing takes its time and love waits with open hands. End of article. Good night.